Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
And before we get started, we'll do our standard disclaimer.
Andy and I both work in cybersecurity sales. Andy for Zscaler, me for Microsoft. However, we record the show outside of work and we self-fund the show. The opinions and attitudes you're about to hear expressed are those of Adam Brewer and Andy Jha and do not reflect those of Zscaler or Microsoft. And with that, on with the show.
All right, so we do have three topics and kind of news things that we wanted to talk about today. The first one is about DEF CON and a little bit of an evil twin attack that happened on a Delta airline. We'll kind of talk through our thoughts on that. The second one is the first known fully or semi-fully autonomous AI cyber attack on a government. And then finally, a policy shift out of Washington that now lets private companies hack back into transnational criminal networks. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
First, the Delta flight. So Delta Flight 591 out of Las Vegas to Atlanta, coming back from DEF CON August 10th. It's basically one day after DEF CON wrapped. And about an hour into the flight, the pilots send a message down to Delta's operations center over ACARS, which is their in-flight digital communications system.
It's like text messaging for pilots, effectively.
Correct. Yep. And so the message basically said that a passenger created a fake Wi-Fi network called Delta Wi-Fi Fast, and the crew thinks that the passenger who did this is trying to scam other passengers. And then there was a follow-up message that blames it on a bunch of passengers who were at a cyber conference in Vegas who were able to jam our Wi-Fi and broadcast their own signal, end quote. So that's what they sent over ACARS. Delta's official statement was a little bit more careful. They said an unauthorized Wi-Fi network was presented on the plane for a short time. It wasn't operated or supplied by Delta. Nobody hacked Delta's systems. Flight safety was never in question, and no emergency was declared. So that's good because whoever did it didn't compromise the safety of the systems aboard the plane. They just jammed the Wi-Fi signal that you're using to send messages or like on United now they have Starlink, so you can watch movies or whatever. So the crew, it did shut the real Wi-Fi down for about 30 minutes as a precaution, and then what was claimed from the passengers was that there was the fake network served up a phishing page designed to steal login credentials, including Google logins. So as of the current status, as we're recording this on a Sunday night here, August 16th, there have been no arrests that have been made. The FBI in Atlanta says they're looking into it. No one has been publicly identified, and there's some more dramatic claims like agents meeting the plane at the gate and seizing the equipment. They're all unconfirmed, so we'll just make sure that we stick to what's actually confirmed. The head of press for DEF CON told a reporter that the conference itself got hit with a similar attack this year, and that if they caught the person in the act, they would have banned them on the spot. So even the hacking community's own house wasn't safe from this, nor were they tolerating that type of behavior. And we call it the evil twin attack because this is it's a very common kind of attack vector that hackers use, right? And so just making sure that before we understand, it's essentially an attacker will set up a rogue Wi-Fi access point that give it the same name or a very similar name to the network that people already trust. In this case, they did Delta Wi-Fi Fast, which looks a lot like the real Delta Wi-Fi. If you go to like a Hilton hotel or something like that, you might see a bunch of different Hilton networks, and you may not know which one is supposed to be the one that you're actually supposed to join. It often gets paired with something called a de-authentication attack, where an attacker will send forged commands that kick devices off the real network. And that's what they did here. They did the de-authentication, then jammed that Wi-Fi so that it wouldn't be able to broadcast. Then they broadcasted their own. And if you do that enough, that's what happens. Like people kind of give up on the real network and then they see the fake one, and because it's the only one working, so that they'll connect to that. And then once you're on the fake network, of course, then attackers can watch your unencrypted traffic and then, middle that connection, show you a fake login page, collect whatever you type in. And the barrier to entry to this is not very high. You don't need like a skilled hacker. A Wi-Fi pineapple, which is what a lot of people walk around in their backpacks at DEF CON. This is probably what was used, or at least rumored to be used on the plane. You can do this out of the box. It's not expensive. You can buy one pretty cheap. We covered a similar kind of attack a few weeks ago when Carly was here. Kind of a similar attack, except they compromised the gateway and then did some DNS, monkey play around there. So a little bit different. They never actually broadcasted a different Wi-Fi signal, which is kind of the whole point of this one. So very similar type of attack, different execution. From a legal side, this is definitely a federal crime because you're on a plane crossing over state lines, and there's even something called a special aircraft jurisdiction. So any civil aircraft in the United States in flight falls under federal jurisdiction, regardless of if the flight crosses state lines or not. And then the jamming itself, it's a federal law. The Communications Act makes it illegal to willfully interfere with licensed radio communication. That covers the DAuth attack. So prison time, fines, all of that. And then the phishing page, that would look like wire fraud. So which carries up to 20 years in federal prison. So not good overall, like 3 federal crimes in general. And there is precedent because there was apparently a guy in Australia named Michael Klapsis who ran an evil twin network at airports on a Qantas flight. He got caught after the flight attendant got suspicious, and he got 7 years in prison. So, my take on this is pretty much the same as a lot of people in the community, how they've reacted. Even if you're technically capable of this, it's not something you should do. It's, as they say in Hackers, if you've seen the movie, this is universally stupid, man. You're in a metal tube. You have nowhere to go. You're in a seat that they can identify you with your full legal name. There's often federal marshals that are flying on these planes undercover as well. This is just not something that anyone who has the capability or the means to do it should be doing, even if you can. So definitely not a good thing. But I thought it was good to kind of walk through it. I'm always very conscious of what Wi-Fi network that I'm connecting to. I know that a lot of endpoint protection also has like rogue Wi-Fi kind of machine learning detection built in. I know Defender for Endpoint does. I'm fairly certain Zscaler has something, but CrowdStrike, all that stuff has like some sort of rogue Wi-Fi, anomaly built into it. So, but if you're on your own, we talked about it in detail on the episode with Carly on how to kind of secure your own devices through encrypted DNS and VPNs and all this other stuff. So, but yeah, I thought this was a fun talking point, and whoever this is, hopefully they learned their lesson if they're not going to prison. But I suspect that there's going to be some sort of penalty eventually.
Very timely with covering the hospitality hotel industry attacks that Microsoft announced to the world a couple weeks ago. And you did a good job of drawing the distinction between, in that scenario, it was Midnight Blizzard, likely attribution, who had broken into actual infrastructure and had redirected some of the captive portals and that effort. A much more sophisticated attack, right? Where that's actual infrastructure being compromised. This one is simply just, it looked similar to the Delta Wi-Fi. Maybe there was a DAuth attack involved too. We're interpolating a lot from a little that's been made official here. As you were also careful to point out, Andy, that not a whole lot's been confirmed here other than there was an incident. Flight safety was never in question. The flight, of course, landed safely in Atlanta. This does continue to give conferences like DEF CON a bad name, a bad reputation, and it continues to undermine the professionalism of our industry. And one of the points I made 2 years ago now after the CrowdStrike incident was our job is to advise on risk to the business and reduce risk to the business. That's our purpose, is to allow whatever the business does, whatever widgets they make, or whatever services they offer, to continue to operate unimpeded without the risk of adversaries interrupting that business. And our job is to maximize that uptime with minimal expense. And when we look like children playing with toys, as opposed to the very serious work that is keeping the world's business operational, it undermines all of us. And my point when CrowdStrike happened was the medicine was worse than the disease at that moment. CrowdStrike, this tool that's supposed to keep your endpoints secure and operational, caused billions of dollars, billion with a B, maybe even trillions, I don't know, in lost productivity. And so in that case, most organizations had not suffered a cybersecurity attack that was as devastating as their legitimate tooling going offline caused. That undermines the job we're trying to do here. And stuff like this does too. And look, I know it's a bad actor. It's someone who wants to treat it like a game instead of the serious business that it is. And especially flying on an aircraft is in general very serious business. There's not a lot of sense of humor once you step foot on an aircraft. It is funny how just even things like I'll see a social media post where someone would be like, it's the DIY espresso martini. Go to Starbucks and buy this drink and then smuggle airliners, which you don't have to smuggle airliners, but small bottles of liquor through TSA, you don't have to smuggle them. You're allowed to carry them through. However, if you're going to crack them open and pour them in your drink, that's fine to consume in the airport, but you cannot bring it on the aircraft. And it's amazing how you will watch people get in fights over this because they can't understand the distinction between allowed inside the airport, allowed to carry on the plane, provided they remain closed, not allowed to be consumed on the aircraft. Because if you've flown, the flight attendants say you're not allowed to consume any alcohol you brought on board. It has to be served by the flight attendants on the aircraft. Anyhow, people just struggle with the seriousness of this. And I mean, same thing, that's technically speaking a federal crime. And it's just not worth playing around with. So, I kind of think that's the angle I take here. As far as takeaways for our listeners, if you're working in enterprise cybersecurity, I think your ongoing training and education and awareness is probably sufficient. You still teach people, don't connect to unfamiliar networks. Andy, you mentioned tools today, try to detect them as well. Not a lot to do there. And again, we just keep training look for anomalies, look for weird behavior. Delta's very clear that their Wi-Fi is free and requires only a SkyMiles username and password. If you're getting prompted for something else when trying to access the Delta Wi-Fi, your brain should go off and say, this doesn't seem right. They're asking for my Google account. That's not part of the deal. They need my SkyMiles account. That's what they're validating. As long as I have one, I can use the Wi-Fi for free. So I don't think there's a lot of action other than that. I just more lament the reputational damage to our industry that sometimes doesn't look grown up. Sometimes, there is a strong reputation in IT circles that cybersecurity still slows every project down, that cybersecurity likes to make rules for everyone else and not follow them themselves. See that all the time, where what's good for you isn't necessarily good for me, and that's a bad attitude, and just it's too bad. We can move on, but I think those are my points I'd want to make. Is probably your existing training is sufficient here from educating your users. It is substantially different from the hospitality attacks that Microsoft observed. And again, let's be grown-ups here. We have a very serious job, and I'm all for having fun. I'm all for ethical hacking. I'm a certified ethical hacker. This is not that. And it's childish and really has no place in our industry.
Good call outs there. All right, so let's move on here. So between July 1st and July 4th, there were some hackers who were suspected to be linked to China, ran what researchers are calling the first fully autonomous cyber attack against the government. This was discovered by Dream, which is an Israeli cybersecurity firm. They found a 160 megabyte archive online containing 1,300 files that documented the attacker's entire operational workspace. So basically, they found the attacker's own notes. And over 4 days, running up to 8 AI agents at once. The system mapped 21 government systems. They cracked 85 user accounts and pulled more than 2,500 personnel records for Taiwan's government system. It then later expanded to hit Taiwan's nuclear safety agency and several IT supply chain vendors and at least 7 energy companies. The tools were built on 2 open source AI agent frameworks called Hermes and OpenClaw. The researchers didn't know which underlying AI model was actually powering them. Taiwan's government did confirm this publicly on August 13th, and they said it clearly originated overseas and combined regular hacking with AI agents. As far as who's behind it, the researchers found simplified Chinese in the internal documents, which points toward China. If you're not familiar, the Chinese language has 2 different variations. One is simplified and one is traditional. The writing system used in Taiwan is traditional, and the one that's used in China is simplified. So it's very straightforward. If you find simplified Chinese, it's pretty much mainland China. But neither Taiwan nor Dream have officially confirmed that attribution. Obviously, we know attribution is very difficult. And then, of course, when CNN asked China's foreign ministry about it, they said they weren't familiar with the situation. Of course, they weren't. So there was and I just wanted to make sure when we say fully autonomous, like it's not just thinking on its own. So we can say semi-autonomous, whatever you want, or near autonomous, whatever you want to say, but there is still a human somewhere in this particular chain, and in most of the chains that we talk about here, probably all of them. Somebody chose the target, somebody gave the system its objective. There was a capable operator behind it running the show. So just wanted to make sure we frame that, because I say autonomous, but we all know there's still a human kind of behind the actions of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is kind of the part where I think defenders can kind of perk up and listen to how the system actually operated. So the agents were handling reconnaissance, credential attacks, and vulnerability research, largely without a human approving each step. When one technique failed, the system didn't just stop. It went out and researched new exploitation methods, scouring vulnerability databases, GitHub, and then fed what it learned into the next wave of attacks. At one point, the agent swarm found a signature validation flaw in the government's authentication service and used it to install a persistent backdoor. In Dream's write-up, they said that the cost of running a competent attack has collapsed, but the cost of defending against one has not. There's also a detail that connects directly to something we've talked about before, which is the attacker reportedly got around the AI agent's own safety guardrails just by labeling the activity as, quote, authorized penetration testing. And that exact same category is a trick we've talked about with AI agents going rogue during lab testing, at OpenAI and Anthropic, except this time it wasn't a sandbox. It was a live operation against a government. So if we zoom out a little bit, I don't think this is just a Taiwan story. I don't think we should just treat it as that, because Taiwan's been describing this as a hybrid warfare for years. Disinformation, cyber attacks, near daily military exercises, which is all part of the pressure from Beijing over Taiwan's sovereignty. And this AI piece is new. So while the AI piece is new, the campaign it's sitting inside is not. So as most of our audience is US. So if you're a US listener and you're paying closely to this one specifically, look at the current landscape. We've talked about this previously, but just to kind of bring it back, we have US and Israel going active air campaigns against Iran since the end of February of this year, still ongoing as we record this. We also covered Iran-linked attacks on US water infrastructure. We talked about the North Korea IT worker infiltration scheme that's still active. Russia's persistent cyber activity against the US and allied targets also hasn't slowed down. And now China has demonstrated working proof of this agentic semi-autonomous intrusion at a nation-state scale built on tools that are publicly available. So each one of our active adversaries now has real-world example of what this looks like, and the how-to isn't locked behind anything. It's open source. So I think for U.S. companies and government agencies, a couple of things come to mind. Detection has to evolve past static indicators. A system that invents like a brand new technique, the moment the first one gets blocked, is not going to get caught by a signature that was written for last year's attack. We talked about this also before. Patch cycles, they need to get faster. So an attacker can research and pivot to a new exploit in hours, which punishes slow patching a lot harder than a human-paced attacker ever did. And honestly, this needs to be a board level conversation, not a SOC level one, right? The old assumption that sophisticated adaptive multi-vector intrusions require like a big, well-funded nation state team isn't just that anymore. Like I said before, the barrier to entry to attack is lower or has collapsed, but the barrier to defending is not. So that's my thoughts on that one. Adam?
The last thing you said there about, you were talking about the barrier to attack versus barrier to defend. Also think about the complexity of it. And to use an analogy like intercepting a missile in mid-flight. So if I'm an adversarial nation and I'm shooting missiles at another nation, I just need to hit a target. I may have a desired target in mind, but any target's a good target in depending on the state of the war kind of attitude, right? So I have a lot of surface area I can hit. But for me to intercept it, I have to hit this very tiny thing in midair and predict its trajectory in flight, like versus the thing on the ground's not moving. So think of the complexity of shooting at a static target on the ground that's large and unmoving versus trying to hit a tiny thing moving mid-flight. And that's kind of, to use a very coarse analogy, the difference between defending versus attacking. Defending, you have to be right on that specific attack to stop it, versus attacking, you have a broad attack surface to go hit. You have infinite options. You only have to be right once, versus as a defender, you have to be right every single time. So this continues to be a challenge. And frankly, just what I'm seeing out there in the world is organizations are not prepared for this at all. They are still very much comfortable with, I think, platforms and systems and strategies that do not remotely scale to defend these types of attacks and are woefully unprepared. And I think in particular, the non-platform approach to a lot of this stuff is extremely dangerous, but only getting more dangerous with time. So I'm deeply concerned. Andy, I think you did a good job kind of walking through the considerations and what to prepare for. And longtime listeners of the show, as we approach our 6-year anniversary next month, can you believe it? Know that I am not Chicken Little. I am not the sky is falling. I am not freaking out over things. This one has my attention because as I talk to enterprise customers every single day and I evaluate their maturity and how they defend their environment, they're not ready. They do not have the ability to track and defend against the rate of these attacks, the volume of actions AIs take. I mean, when we talked about the Hugging Face OpenAI incident, Andy, wasn't it 185,000 activities per hour or per minute? Either way, even if it's per hour, heck, even if it's per day, humans cannot scale to that. Period. Cannot scale to that. And if you think you're just going to dump this all on your SIM and you're going to have some static rules, pick out the things you need to find, you're deceiving yourself. You're not prepared. Hoping that your operator staring at the matrix scrolling past them is going to be able to pick out the attacks. No. So anyhow, this is a big deal. We need to be really thinking about how we prepare to defend against this. And we need to acknowledge this can be really freaking hard because of the asymmetric nature of these attacks. And we are asymmetrically disadvantaged against them. And so doing the same thing we've always been doing, 10% better, 20% better, is not going to work. Like, and this is hard for humans to understand. Humans have a hard time like ripping it up and starting over. But let me leave you with this thought. Do you know how you find a needle in a haystack? You burn the haystack down because the only thing left behind is the needle. And if you want to find these needles in the haystack today, you may need to burn your stack down too.
Wow, I've never heard that, but that makes sense. Okay, last topic. I thought this was super interesting too. There was a new new memo that came out from the Trump administration, a huge policy shift. And so I'll just talk about it real quick here. On August 12th, President Trump signed a memo titled Expanding Capabilities to Combat Transnational Cyber-Enabled Crime. And it builds on an executive order that he signed back in March. What it does is it creates a formal program that lets vetted private companies conduct offensive cyber operations against foreign criminal groups under the federal government's control. We'll get into the details because it's not like just, go nuts, even though like that's what some people kind of equated it to. There's a little bit of background here. They created a new body called the National Coordination Center. It runs the program. There's two people who see it day to day. One's appointed by the Attorney General, one's appointed by the Secretary of Homeland Security. And every single operation needs to have written approval from both of them before a company can act. So there's no like blanket permission. Every operation has to have approval. To even participate, a company has to sign a contract with DOJ or DHS and goes through vetting on the technical skills, their track record. They have to post a bond of at least $1 million, which they lose if they violate the terms. The target of all this is sometimes called a CE-TCO, a cyber-enabled transnational criminal organization. Basically, it's foreign criminal groups. Ransomware gangs, scam call centers, romance scam operations, business email compromise crews, the kind of groups causing Americans billions of dollars a year in losses. So I saw the term letters of marque get tossed around a lot when people were talking about this. And that's a term that kind of dated back to the age of like sailing, like on the open seas with like pirates. So a government would authorize a private ship owner or a privateer to attack and capture enemy or pirate vessels on the government's behalf. So it turns civilians into lawful combatants. Under our Constitution, only Congress can issue one of these, not the president. And the U.S. hasn't issued one since the War of 1812. So I don't think technically, it's not a letter of marque because Congress didn't do that, right? So instead of asking Congress for authority, the memo leans on an existing exception buried in the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, where it says that it doesn't apply to lawfully authorized investigative or intelligence activities by law enforcement agencies. So the administration is positioning these private companies as extensions of DOJ and DHS under that exception rather than independently commissioned privateers. So that matters because no appellate court has ever validated stretching that exception to cover deputizing private companies. And Congress already rejected attempts to amend the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act for this exact purpose twice over the years. The memo doesn't it doesn't ask Congress for permission. It just claims the authority exists, which is pretty much par for the course when it comes to this administration. So functionality in spirit, it is privateering, private companies doing government-sanctioned offensive operations against foreign targets. But legally, it's built specifically kind of to avoid the need of that kind of congressional authorization an actual letter of marque would require. Let's talk about the guardrails that are written into this thing real quick. State actors are excluded by definition. So if a group is institutionally part of a foreign government, it doesn't qualify as a target unless there's a real clear intelligence proving that connection. So you can just kind of toss out like any state actor in this that's tied to a government. And that's kind of a soft spot that I just wanted to call out because there's obviously plenty of real world threat groups that kind of sit in this gray area. Like state-tolerated ransomware groups like North Korea's Lazarus, where like the line between criminal and state gets blurry really fast. And that ambiguity is what a lot of critics are worried about. There's also a hard stop built in. The program executive directors are not allowed to approve any operation likely to cause loss of life, serious injury, or anything that would count as a use of force under international law. So if an operation accidentally touches a U.S. person or system inside the U.S. or system controlled by a U.S. person, the company has to stop immediately, run cleanup procedures, and report it up the chain. What's not public is the actual process of confirming a target, like what is really a criminal group or what is not. And so that framework sits inside of a classified annex. We can read the guardrails, but we can't verify from the outside whether they're actually being followed in practice. I saw a lot of like doom and gloom, like kind of Pandora's box concern, like, if we start doing this, what can other people do to us? I do think collateral damage is a big concern here because criminal groups do operate through like infrastructure that they don't control. So you don't want your blast radius like so big that you're trying to take down like a criminal data center and you accidentally take down like hospital servers instead, because they kind of sometimes piggyback off of servers and infrastructure that they don't know. And there's also a gray zone for the people actually doing this work as well. Like they're not soldiers. They don't get combatant protections if something goes wrong overseas. They're not real government employees either, so they don't get sovereign immunity. So there's a real gap there. Using contractors this way makes us, I think no better than China or Iran, where the private industry already does state tolerated hacking in like those countries. Like this is very common in China where they'll basically commandeer hackers and have them do their work. And there's also like a slippery slope. Like, right now we only target criminal groups, not nation state, but there's nothing in the memo that rules out kind of moving that goalpost later on. So yeah, like I'm curious, like from a moral aspect, Adam, like what do you think, like especially with Microsoft and like Digital Crimes Unit, like that has done a lot of work over the years bringing down, they've worked in partnership with FBI and other government agencies, and now possibly like doing more, like, just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I got a kick hearing about Letters of Marque because one of my favorite games growing up was Sid Meier's Pirates, which dates all the way back to the Commodore 64. There was a great version on the Sega Genesis, Pirates Gold, and then it was remade in the early 2000s, about 2003 timeframe for the PC. There was even a version ported to the original Xbox, which you can still buy to this day, by the way, not a sponsored post, but just a game I love. Sid Meier's Pirates, the original Xbox One game, is playable on current Xbox generation hardware. So Xbox One, Xbox Series, you can go buy the game for $10 and play it right now, even though it's a game from 2003. But in the game, you can declare your nationality. You're either English, Spanish, French, or Dutch. And you can go see like the English governor if you're English, and he'll say, present you a letter of marque. And then you can go plunder Spanish ships. Here's the thing though. And here's the point I'm getting to, not just talking about a great video game from back in the day. When you go plunder a ship, you get all of their gold, all of their cannon, all of their spices, all their food. You can sign up their crew members and you get to keep the ship. You get stuff from attacking. So there's like a benefit to you to go do this stuff. What I'm trying to understand as I'm listening to you describe all of this stuff, Andy, is clearly this is not open season. Like there are guardrails in place. People could quibble. Mm-hmm. There should be more or less, but there are some guardrails. There is a whole policy framework in place. Why, as any private company, why do I want to do this? What's in it for me? If I am a non-charity, I am a for-profit enterprise run by staunch capitalists, what's my interest in going to hack back? What's that get me? I can't figure that out. So maybe I'm missing something obvious.
That's a good question.
But I don't understand why I would want to invest effort in this for the most part. Maybe if there's been an attack group that has been persistently attacking me as a private enterprise, and maybe I do have enough intelligence sources that I know how to take them out pretty easily, then maybe I would seek permission to just go disable this group to get them off my back. I could maybe see that. And again, it goes back to from the purely capitalistic point of view, if I am spending more money on defending my environment from this attacker than I could spend money to disable them, then it's more attractive for me to disable them to continue to defend against them. I could see that point. But for the most part, that's the part in all of this I'm missing is I don't understand how this turns into, as a private enterprise, how do I make money from doing this? And that's the part I don't get, because going back to my pirate point, pirates, privateers, they got stuff. They got ships and gold and cannons and crew members. Like there was a benefit to doing it. And then usually, by the way, you go back and see the English governor. Oh, what's he give you? He gives you more land. He maybe introduces you to his daughter. Like there's all these benefits in the game from doing it. Government could maybe hand out favorable contracts if you go take someone out that's attractive. Who knows? That again, you can't put that aside right now in the current environment. That's certainly plausible, but that's the part I'm not getting. So I don't mean to like derail the whole conversation, but like I'm missing the what's my motivation here part.
Man, that's such a good point, because I didn't even think about that. I just thought, let's just go and do it. But yeah, there's no like value unless maybe like you get to keep their crypto wallet or something like that if you hack it and you get to keep it. But none of that's detailed
Finders
out.
Keepers, like, is that the rule here? Like, I mean, there you go. Crypto wallet, that'd be the digital equivalent of what I'm describing. You get to plunder the wallet. I don't know.
There's nothing here. There's nothing here that says that. So I don't know.
I think it'd have to be what I'm describing, right? Where it is from a capitalist perspective, engaging in an operation to disable an attacker is financially better for me than continuing to be battered by attacks by them, I guess. And so if I'm insert any major tech company, or I'm Google, I'm Apple, whomever, and I just there's this persistent adversary that won't leave me alone, maybe I go seek permission through this program to go take them out, because I know how. I have the talent, I have the capability. Let me knock them down. That's the only justification I can think of, unless I'm missing something here. I mean, maybe you get all the way into, Andy, like privateer for hire. Like, oh, you got someone rubbing you the wrong way. We're like mercenaries. Effectively, we're a mercenary cyber group. I don't know. Like it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyhow,
it's super interesting. But yeah, you bring up obviously a lot of good points that any company would want to think through. Like why am I going to do this? So there's obviously a host of other things like your legal teams and your insurance and all this other stuff, whether or not like you should be doing this from a private company standpoint. So
you did bring up Microsoft, and I do want to touch on this point. You brought up the digital crimes unit, and Microsoft has traditionally used the digital crimes unit to either disrupt groups that disseminate CSAM, child sexual abuse material. Microsoft has used the digital crimes unit and used novel legal means like pulling domain registrations and shutting down command and control servers to take those out. But also sometimes when there's been large like worms or really large botnets, Microsoft has used the digital crimes unit to stop those as well. I think part of the digital crimes unit is operated, and I don't know this, and again, you heard the disclaimer, but I'll reiterate, I am not speaking on Microsoft's behalf. I'm speculating a little bit. I think it is partly run as a goodwill measure. We have the resources, we have the ability, we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do. And that's certainly an angle for this as well to consider, is some organizations may engage in this in some capacity because it's the right thing to do. But I think there's a lot of points here on, is this clearly like a good versus bad thing? When it is clearly good versus bad, companies may be more willing to engage. The other time I think the digital crimes unit gets involved is kind of going back to my capitalist framing, where taking out this entire massive botnet is operationally less expensive than it is to fight it in multiple fronts all over the place across the ecosystem. When it's taking down many Microsoft customers, you're getting hundreds of unified support calls, you're having to do 0-day patches to the Windows operating system, like all very expensive things. Sometimes it's easier to just go take them out through the digital crimes unit, which, to be clear, does not hack back. It has used legal means to disrupt them by doing things like taking back domain registration and redirecting domains to black hole IP ranges and stuff like that. That's traditionally how the digital crimes unit is operated. So there's a play here for that too. And I did want to address that directly because you did ask. It's obviously distinct from what we're talking about, but adjacent. So that's for food for thought. It's one of the things I'm most proud of being a Microsoft employee is what the digital crimes unit does, because for the most part, it's a force for good for no reason other than because we can. And, in a capitalist society and a for-profit company like Microsoft, you don't get a lot of that. But that's something I think we're really proud to offer to the world and using our strength for that capacity.
All right. Great thoughts there, Adam. That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening as always. Our contact information, along with the links to the stories that we used for the show, will be in the show notes. If you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future, just email us. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.